Okay, well, let's get started with introductions and then folks will roll in as we get to the meat of what is going on right now. And thank you so much for being here with me and with Build in our community today. And I know you also probably have a lot of folks that are following you. You've been such an amazing advocate in the space for foreign nationals and putting out really great information. And so a lot of people were excited to hear from you. Would love for you to start with an introduction. I'll introduce myself a little bit as well after, and we'll go from there.
That sounds great. Thank you, Danielle. It is such a privilege to be here. It is so nice to share the stage with you and with Build today. I am a business immigration practitioner with Grossman Young and Hammond. We are a multi-practice, all immigration firm based in DC, though I am based in San Diego, California. It is a wild time for immigration, and we are all learning new things all the time. So I have been with the world's largest business immigration provider. I've been with Grossman Young. I've been in between, and it is truly a transformative time, especially for the international student community, which is a group that I'm very passionate about advocating for. Higher education is a really interesting and important space, and it needs all of the support it can get, especially during times like this. So it is really a privilege to be here to share information and to talk with you and our guests about what we see and what's upcoming.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Danielle Goldman. I'm CEO at Build Talent Labs, and we have creative immigration solutions and programs that help individuals with paths to stay and work and thrive here in the US. And we work with attorneys like Anne to make those pathways happen for you. So we'll talk a little bit more about those pathways today, but the topic today that we are going to dive into is the new duration of status rule. And Anne, if you could just really briefly give an overview of what duration of status means, because it's another term, another rule, another piece of immigration jargon that is being thrown out on LinkedIn and in the news. But for individuals on the call who might not really understand what this rule is, can you give us just that preliminary overview?
Sure thing. So anyone who's spending any time in immigration knows that there's an alphabet at all times that's being alluded to, whether it's a visa type or an abbreviation. And so what does DS mean? DS means duration of status. So traditionally, and including up until today, there are certain classifications where when an individual comes through to clear customs after being abroad, the CBP officer who looks at the foreign national's passport will say, okay, this person is in a specific program that allows me to admit them for D/S. This is the letters that you see on your I-94. And the idea behind it for academics is, we have programs that are shorter, we have programs that are longer, we have programs that can be extended. And so practically speaking, to say you are admitted through the duration of the status that is granted by the program in which you're enrolled has provided some flexibility. And now we are seeing some very significant shifts to that understanding of what it means to have a student status and what the implications are.
And what does the new rule really change for individuals? There's obviously going to be a lot of layers to this because the rule isn't a few sentences. There's a lot of detail in there that and potentially some hidden pieces like the CPT piece that people really aren't even focused on when they think of duration of status. But can you give us kind of the building blocks of what went into this rule?
Absolutely. Just for illustration, this is the rule. I've printed it out. So if
Oh
anyone wants
my
light reading for the weekend, it's
wow.
a big one. There's a lot. These are itty bitty fonts, single space in 3 columns. So it is a long rule. It is very lengthy, and I'm not going to read this, but I'm going to give you guys the broad strokes here. So the reason that it's called the DS rule is because this removes the duration of status notation that I've just described. So F1 and J1 students, scholars and their dependents, so spouses and dependent children. When they've entered the US, they've had this DS, and instead the length is going to be a specific finite date. So the CBP officer, instead of marking D/S after September 15th, is instructed to put a specific date on it. This is not the only implication, though. It's not just how does my I-94 look. There is a reduction in the number of days for a grace period. So reducing the grace period for F1 students from a 60-day grace period to a 30-day grace period. So this is going to shift the timeline along which folks have to plan for their next steps. J's will remain 30 days because it has been that way historically. There are two possible ways to provide for an extension of an academic program. And this is definitely going to be something that's really interesting that we watch evolve to see what preferences are there, what trends do we see, what might be more advisable for folks depending on their individual circumstances. But generally speaking, folks will be able to apply for extensions from within the US. This is submitted to US Citizenship and Immigration Services after working with the school to say this is how long my program will need to be. It will also be possible to depart the US with that same documentation from the school and ask the State Department to give an annotation. So the CBP officer upon reentry will then be given a specific date for updating the I-94. So these are going to be some shifts that might affect some more than others, but certainly everyone in the international student and scholar community should be aware that these changes are upcoming.
So with the practical applications of having a finite date, let's just talk about some examples that might impact folks, right? So having a finite date on a 4-year bachelor's degree means that if you need to take time off, if you have to take extra credits, if you end up doing a co-op or some, internship or CPT, you take a semester to do that kind of engagement at a company. There's just not the same flexibility with being able to take the extra weeks, months, or semesters of that to finish that degree. And that's true at all levels, Anne, or is it just, even if you're in a PhD program,
Yeah.
which could take 20, some people take 20 years to finish a PhD. Some people take, are able to do it in a finite period, but is really, are when you talk about the changes for people with and the risks of that finite period, is that what you're thinking of? Are there other risks?
No, that's exactly it, Danielle. So some students, and we're thinking especially about those in longer programs or, perhaps transitioning to post-completion OPT, they might be in a position they haven't been before where they would need to file this extension of stay application with USCIS. Otherwise, their authorized admission period would expire and you would be in a position where you have an I-94 date that allowed you until a specific date and you no longer have that authorization. So for many people, this will represent an additional immigration filing that previously a student wouldn't have needed. So in addition to needing to understand what must be filed, there's also the practical implication and the financial implication that this is a filing fee,
right,
that attends the extension. Premium processing is a USCIS service that is available at times, and it can speed up the process. On a 539 for F1s, requesting a change of status, the premium processing fee is $1,965, not a small sum. It does guarantee an adjudicative action within 30 business days once all prerequisites are met. Sometimes these prerequisites involve a biometrics appointment where you'll have your photo taken or your fingerprints. I will also say, without intending to inspire fear, that sometimes premium processing requests are made appropriately and paid appropriately and not always honored. And so this is another risk. that I would argue is probably worth taking if you want the peace of mind. But unfortunately, we have seen some circumstances where even after paying the fee, that
Mm.
service isn't delivered timely. So in addition to having this additional filing fee, we also have this additional uncertainty for making those plans
That's
that
right.
go with school, what comes after school, things along those lines.
Right. That makes sense. So individuals who are taking longer within their degrees, um, they do have the chance to file this extension, but there's uncertainty in the approval times and high costs of filing with premium processing. So just a few added barriers, but nothing that can't be overcome.
That's
There's
right.
solutions there, so it's not wildly negative for folks in this sense. It's just another layer of barrier and challenge that the administration has implemented here. Seems to be my takeaway from this. Yeah.
You're totally right on. One thing that I would be remiss to not mention is, this also involves coordination with folks, international student offices with their
Yeah.
DSOs. And so DSOs are going to be learning this new rule. International student offices might have different resources to manage these things. So this really underscores how valuable it is to plan in advance, which many people in academia are already very well suited to do, but really highlighting the value of proactivity, getting on something sooner than you need to. It's so much better to be told, I would love to handle this for you in a couple weeks rather than, holy smokes, we only have a couple weeks. So keep your eye on your calendar, keep your eye on your DSO and their calendar so that you are hopefully putting everybody in a position to manage this on a basis that is as minimally stressful as possible.
Yeah. And speaking of need to think about timelines earlier now, what are your thoughts on the change in the grace period from 60 to 90 days for OPT? This is, a new, definitely, and quite impactful for individuals who rely on that time to get their next position or file that extension. So where are you seeing some of the challenges you're anticipating there?
Yeah, it's a great question. The shift from 60 days to 30 days, when I put myself in the shoes of an international student who might be thinking about these processes, it's a really significant reduction in time. So it's kind of a truncated version of what are all the things that I have to do? With whom do I need to coordinate for them? What do I need to get in line? J1s are already under this 30-day deadline, but it does bring up interesting questions and I'm sure interesting solutions for how are we going to make sure that this is as seamless a transition and that filings are made timely so that there isn't any interruption, or to the extent that there is one, it's as small as possible.
Right. And for any employers on the call, employers do need to think about hiring sooner and thinking about those, like pushing those timelines back a little bit into the semester when they think about giving those offers and starting the, you know, petitions for H-1B, potentially sooner during the OPT, not during the semester, but rather during their OPT period. We file cap exempt H-1Bs all year long, but during this, I'd say post lottery period, we get a lot of folks who come to us within their 60-day grace period looking to file a cap exempt H-1B with us. And it's a very stressful timeline with the 60 days, let
Yeah.
alone 30 days. Companies don't often anticipate, a 4-month timeline on filings or 5 months or 6 months ahead. And recruiting cycles might need to shift to adjust as well. So it's a very interesting time for companies to be thinking about that.
It's a really good point, Danielle. And it also brings to mind how practitioners and I'm sure DSOs have thought about sort of the calendar. It used to be that cap season was this sort of finite time on the calendar, like tax season. But now, really since 2020, when the registration period came into play, I'm sure that it has also affected cap exempt filers because the cap lottery season isn't this 3-month period where things are a bit more predictable. So that really showcases whether you are subject to a cap, whether you are not, keeping an eye on the calendar is more important now, I would argue, than it's been before, because these timelines are shortening for the grace periods while the seasonality of the cap lottery seems to be growing.
Right, right. And then the last issue that was a little bit hidden and has not been highlighted, I don't think, to the extent to which it deserves, is this day one CPT change. And from the read that we have at Build, we understand that individuals cannot do a day one CPT program or are not eligible for day one CPT if they are getting a degree at the same level in which they already have received a degree. And so that means that folks that typically use the pathway of going back for a second master's degree are not eligible for that day one CPT to start working on the first day of that master's program. That's a big change. Is that your read, and what are you talking about with companies right now regarding that?
Yes, there are so many interesting caveats of this layer in the DS rule, and this might be referred to as the new degree progression rule. So to sort of take a step back, at each level of education, folks are permitted to use certain work authorization. So if I have a bachelor's degree and I complete it, I may be eligible for 12 months of OPT, and if I have a STEM field, then an additional 24 months thereafter. When I go for my master's, it refreshes. Now, it has been the case that if I follow my master's in civil engineering with a master's in business, I would be eligible potentially for day one CPT, depending on my program. What Danielle just pointed out is definitely a very important caveat, because earning one master's degree and beginning another, that type of thing after September 15th isn't going to be something we can see. The idea, I suppose, behind it is that students are supposed to move forward, I say this in quotations, academically. After completing a degree, the next academic program would need to be at a higher education level. But this really brings up some interesting questions that, we've all been thinking about. You think about those in the legal space. A JD and an LLM are both things that allow people to contribute in the legal field, which is higher. What about an MBA versus a master's in science or a master of arts? What about a PhD or an MD? What if I went to medical school and got my MD, but then I wanted to do a master's in public health? That's a pretty common progression, but what are we going to do? These are very noble academic aspirations, and it is going to, I fear, drive people to think about becoming educated elsewhere because it's going to be prohibited here. So in addition to having the practical implication of, I want to stay in the States, what is this going to do to the landscape of higher education in our country? It's right. A little scary.
Really interesting. Do you think there are attorneys who are going to try to make arguments that some of these master's programs are a step forward to build upon a previous master's program, or do you think the rule is pretty cut and dry and very clear that that's like what is prohibited there?
I think that there's a lot of zealous advocacy, and folks are going to be interested in trying to make those arguments. I'm not sure to whom or how receptive the listening ears will be, but it will be very interesting. I think that there's a lot of compelling policy reasons to have an expansive view on this, but I'm one person, so I suppose we'll see what others think. And I'm sure if and when you and I talk after September 15th, we will have even more to say about it.
And what about folks who are already prepared they've been accepted into fall day one CPT programs, or they're in day one CPT? Is there some sort of ability to be grandfathered in, or what is the language on that, and how are you advising folks?
No, it's a great question. So I feel like for someone who is in their program already, you've been accepted, you're already rolling, you're in the United States, you are admitted in an F1 status, your I-94 says DS on it. I think that in this situation, you are likely going to be in a fine position. You know, this would be a student who began a master's program before the effective date. And so the transition for the DS framework isn't happening until September 15th. I wouldn't have the same sort of concern as someone who, for example, is interested in beginning in spring of 2027, because for that semester, we will already see the rule being in place.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I just don't think we can underscore from a corporate side what a big change this is going to be for so many companies, because companies do rely on day one CPT as a strategy to really enable the foreign national to take control of their next step in their immigration process. And foreign nationals pay for their own day one CPT programs. Most times they're able to go sign up for that additional master's degree and sort of buy themselves more time. Others, by the way, I don't mean to say that all people who do day one CPT programs are doing it as a hack for more work authorization. Many people go back for a legitimate MBA or some other project management or data science or now machine learning degrees to add on to their current education, which does better them in their jobs. But it is a really big deal. I mean, some of the largest tech companies, they don't have to take on the risk because they can tell foreign nationals to go just sign up for a day one CPT program and preserve some status while they apply for the next lottery for H-1B, so on and so forth. So I think we're just going to see a real shift in the corporate side of things to try to find alternate pathways and solutions. Have you had companies starting to call you and think about this? Are companies aware of what's going on? And I'm sure there are companies on the call, and there's probably a lot of foreign nationals that are applying for jobs and have to try to start to talk to companies about alternate paths for themselves.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. We certainly have had some organizations get in touch to say, hey, we've got someone who's on a J1 and we read that this rule is changing. Will we still be able to employ them? This person is a J1 and we have them as a research scholar and they have travel after September 15th. What's it going to look like when he comes back? We also have folks that are in the position of asking more broad policy-based questions. We saw that this rule is coming out. We like to hire folks who are on LLMs. Should our hiring practices shift as a result? So we're getting very specific questions on international travel and extensions for existing employees, and we're getting more broad-based policy questions from employers. And your question brings up another really good point, Danielle, which is employers who are in the immigration space and those HR and global mobility folks who have known this framework are going to have the same sort of learning opportunity, whether you want it or not, as the DSOs that we've discussed, because understanding what types of documents show that someone's authorized to work and the timelines that are typical, like you say, go back to the recruiting timeline and the hire timeline. And it really shows the full circle of parties that are affected and how important it will be that everyone have an understanding of this shift that is rapidly approaching.
Right, that's right. Yes, definitely shifts in timelines and potentially hiring strategies and the degrees that they look for. Some companies might say, well, bachelor's candidates with just a bachelor's degree actually are quite appealing right now because they have the ability to go back and get their master's degree and do a day one CPT program. So just to be clear for everyone on the call, if you only have a bachelor's degree, the rule does not say you can't go get day one CPT. You can get this additional degree or go for a master's degree or a PhD as you would like to, if you are interested in it, and get the day one CPT work authorization component. So it is possible there. And individuals can still get F1 status. They can still get the degree. They can't get the work authorization that comes from it. Just to also clarify, is that right, Anne? Or is that not right?
So someone may not, someone who is interested in becoming an F1 student may enroll in a program and may be eligible for the OPT, but where we see the shifts occur is the need for the extension and the ability to be in a program that's of the same academic level. So I think that you're right about, what kind of shifts will we see? Are day one CPT programs going to be as popular? Are more people going to opt for masters and PhDs that they otherwise wouldn't have?
Right.
Like, does your interest in staying in academics grow? There's been approximately a shift downward of about 17% enrollment in international students. And I'm curious how those trends will continue to evolve as this rule takes place. Will some people stay in school at higher degree levels, or again, might they seek educational opportunities outside of the States because these restrictions are
Right.
creating a burden that isn't interesting to take?
Right. Really interesting. So when a company calls you and says, we were about to put this individual into a day one CPT program for the fall, what are you then advising in terms of alternate pathways or solutions? There are so many, and of course we could go through alphabet soup again. Um, how do you even start to approach that call? What does that look like for you and for folks on the call who are trying to think about some alternatives?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, this is a call that I would treat almost like what I would refer to as like a CAP contingency call. When someone is not selected in a CAP lottery, if they have a CAP subject employer, we have a conversation that talks about what are some contingencies we should be considering. We review a resume, we look at this person's academic profile, their professional interests, where they might fit well. And if it's with an employer, we look what might your global operations support. This would be more in the case of perhaps having someone transfer and provide a year of service so that we could facilitate a potential L1 down the road. It really depends and is so individual. But if it's before September and there's the opportunity, I would say if this is aligned with your goals, it's better to jump now than not have the opportunity. It really does drive home, though, how valuable programs like yours can be, Danielle, because thinking about how might we open a door that is otherwise feeling closed, to think about really open-minded ways to continue to remain a contributor.
Right. So I think that I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this. We recently launched a new J1 cultural exchange program because there's just such new opportunity with the research scholar J1. And I wanted to hear some of your thoughts on this potentially being an alternative. J1 training and intern visas are not, folks with OPT or who have gone to school in the US are not typically eligible for that J1. Are you seeing folks who have gone to school, have, completed a degree, get J1 research scholar visas? And if so, could you explain that? Or maybe that's something you have not engaged in.
No, it's definitely a space that I think practitioners are learning more about, and the opportunities are really attractive. When you think about what makes someone a research scholar, I think it's easy at first blush to think of a fairly narrow category. I'm conducting really specific research in a lab and producing reports that go toward a specific initiative. In reality, the J1 research scholar can be a more expansive framework. So thinking about the different ways in which research helps a business's operations move forward, and having an expansive view of what constitutes research and in what ways might a person contribute to the development of research. So it's definitely a place where we are getting more questions. And I think that there is a better understanding in the immigration community about the way that it can be used. I was at the American Immigration Lawyers Association annual conference earlier this year, and in a session learned that it's a very, very small percentage of businesses that rely on this. It's typically more academic institutions, institutions of higher ed. And so it will be really great to see how the opportunity to rely on this expands so that other organizations can benefit from the
Right.
folks who want to make those contributions.
Right. So the research categories have been expanded, and they now do actually apply to many more individuals in tech and in a variety of industries. And one of the ways that we're thinking about this, and curious if you're thinking about it the same way, is if you are working on something that is new, a new product, a new line of business, a new software, and you are developing something that doesn't exist today, that is really constituting what could qualify someone for this J1 research scholar pathway. Is that something you've sort of been advising folks about?
You know, we've certainly been having more conversations of that ilk, especially as technologies are exploding all of the time in all of these new different directions. To be able to develop a sound product inherently involves doing research and doing that type of background work before such a product can be released. I think that one of the things that is challenging, at least from a mindset perspective for folks, is that many of us have thought about research in a much more narrow lens. And so having a more expansive view, having conversations like this is really helpful for everyone to understand where that potential might lead.
Yeah, totally. We're working at Build with our Build Exchange program with the Cultural Vistas team, and we have been bringing on folks into the Research Scholar program. We do the training plans. We get really creative with how we structure that, for trainees and interns, and also for research scholars, and structuring this and making the case that this kind of innovation does require that research. And what is that research going to look like? And that's really what we're doing with companies and foreign nationals. So I say this to sort of try to push folks to understand that while Day One CPT might not be an outlet for folks who already have a master's degree, there are those types of pathways open. And as you alluded to, the CAP exempt H-1B pathway is something that might make sense for some individuals as well. We often see individuals who are foreign national apply to our program in the same moment that they would have considered going back for a Day One CPT program. Often they make this choice, whether they would come to a CAP exempt H-1B program like ours, or whether they would go back to school. And in our program, individuals are not positioned as, instead of going back to school, they're positioned as the trainers of students. And so we have folks in our Build Fellowship program spend 5 hours a week training students within their field, whether it's software, data, medical fields. We had a zoologist last year come through our program and spend 5 hours a week as a fellow to get this CAP exempt H-1B work authorization, which then enabled them to work for their company full time as well. So same idea with Day One CPT, where you're able to then go work full time for your employer, but a different type of engagement. You're not in school, you're instead in this fellowship program, and different costs, because in our program, we partner with companies who pay these fees for our fellowship. And the beauty of a Day One CPT for many foreign nationals and companies was foreign nationals could pay for it themselves. And that's not the case. In the H-1B world, everything is employer based. So we don't go down that route where foreign nationals pay for themselves in our program. I know we've worked together on this a couple of times as well.
Yeah, no, and when I put myself in the shoes of an international student and I think, holy smokes, this is really changing. What might this do for my professional, trajectory? I would take solace in the fact that, this might not be what I had initially conceived of when I was enrolling in my bachelor's program. But the things that you're describing are also really valuable professional learning opportunities.
Right.
You know, you're building your resume and your professional profile, your
Right.
skill set in ways that you might not have thought you would be doing, but can make you a better rounded professional, might make you a more attractive candidate for a future role. So I encourage sunny side thinking for these types
Yeah.
of things that might feel like a rain cloud, but really there is sunshine on the other side, to see how am I going to take this opportunity and use it and learn and give and let it take me to the next place that I'm going professionally.
Yeah, I love that. There has to be some positive thinking here, and there are other pathways open. That's what we keep saying. Every door that has closed in this administration or pathway where there's been a barrier put, there are a lot of people out there that are creating and paving these other roads, and some infrastructure that existed already that people aren't aware of. And so that's part of why we're here today, is to also outline some of these other pathways. And right before this, we were talking about the O visa. And how often do you see students coming out of school or with just a few years of OPT eligible for an O? And how are folks building their cases these days?
Great question. The O is such an interesting space, and I think that people's perspectives on its use or how reliable it is has shifted a lot too. Um, you know, we think about someone in the hard sciences and what has traditionally been seen as a necessary background in terms of how many publications do you have, you know, what's the impact that you've made and for how many people, what are your citations like. I think that because of the way that, you know, media is evolving and people's opportunities have evolved, we're seeing different profiles that would maybe otherwise have not looked as promising still have a path forward. I don't want to paint too sunny a picture because those are still really tough. I completely understand the instinct of an international student to say, look, I have done these impressive things and I think that I would be qualified. But it's important for folks in my position to set expectations appropriately. And if someone isn't ready, we don't want to put someone in a position that you can't likely succeed. But with that said, there are some new kind of understandings of what makes someone eligible. And I know one of the things that you and I were chatting about previously is the different and more flexible arrangements that might make an O possible or attractive or an option on the table when it wasn't before.
Yeah, totally. And Ann and I were talking about the O1 agent option, because one of the things that was so attractive about day one CPT was the ability for, as we've mentioned, a company to put the onus onto a foreign national, right? And many of you on the call who are foreign nationals would welcome the opportunity to take the onus and be able to self sponsor or do some things on your own to get a job and alleviate the risk that a company has innately when they file petitions and go down the immigration sponsorship route. And a comparable opportunity for companies to put that onus on foreign nationals or for foreign nationals to have more autonomy is an O1 agent sponsorship. So foreign nationals can actually have an O1 sponsored not by the employer, but by an agent that holds that O1 and petitions on behalf of the foreign national. And the agent can petition on behalf of the foreign national with an itinerary that has multiple employers on that itinerary. So if you are on the call and you are working for multiple companies on a contract basis, or you want to go work for a company on an O1, but you might start your own company on the side, and there are multiple employers you would like to have that O1 flexibility with, you can consider an agent. Or maybe the company says to you, I don't want to sponsor you. I'm sure if I could get a raise of hands, everyone would raise their hand and say, we've heard that in the last few months or years. And one of the responses that if you are eligible for an O1, foreign nationals could say is, I actually am going to get an agent to sponsor my O1, but I'd like to be employed by your company if you're willing to offer me a job. And you can take that offer letter and go to an O1 agent, and the O1 agent, upon verifying that you are eligible with an attorney for an O1, could file this petition. And so at Build, our Build Extraordinary program works. If Anne has a client that is eligible for an O1, Anne's going to file that O1, but we would be the agent on behalf of the O. Anne, how have these worked for you in the past? And is that something that you see as an increasing trend, or do you see demand for it? And why is it not more popular today?
These are all good questions, and I think you described it perfectly. I think to answer the last question first, why is it not more popular? I'm not sure that there's the level of awareness that there might be for other visa pathways. I think that it's becoming more popular in certain fields because the opportunities and the landscape for making workplace contributions is changing too. Like you mentioned, there are some employers who are really excited about a candidate, but for whatever reason can't or won't commit to sponsorship in a traditional manner. And so as employers make their shifts in sponsorship policies, so too must prospective employees make shifts in how they approach their job hunt. And so definitely working with folks, and when someone has the opportunity, I've got this really cool opportunity, but this person I've also been speaking with, and I'd love to be able to do both. It provides a really nice avenue where all of these things, of course, there is some lining up. Do we have contracts in place? Is the work consistent? Because when you're making an O argument, you're describing how someone has been elevated to the very top of their field. So these opportunities need to be similar. I can't be an HR generalist here and a ballerina there. Like, we need to be realistic about how these contributions are really being made in the same space. But for many people, that's not a problem. And it provides a really exceptional pathway to consider longevity in the States.
Yeah. So there are some options that we just outlined, from the H to J's and O's. And there's probably some attorneys who are going to try to make arguments. We do have a lot of questions, and so I'd love to start to go into. We had a few pre-submitted questions, actually. Are there any of the pre-submitted questions you'd like to answer before we dive into the open ones here?
Sure. Yes. Thank you so much. I've got them written here, so I'm going to just take a look. And thank you to all of you who are here, and thank you for your questions. I would love to be able to answer all of them beautifully and perfectly, and I'm going to apologize here because that is unlikely to happen, but hopefully the responses that Danielle and I give will be good general guidance. Of course, this is not legal advice. Let's talk about one of our pre-submitted questions, which has to do with timing of travel and graduation. So this is something that I think is a good general question. Everyone likes to take vacations, and everyone should take vacations, and international travel is great. It is more important to be looking at your calendars when you're making international travel plans and vacation plans, because, for example, let's say that you have a vacation plan that will take you out of the States and could potentially affect the timeline along which you finish your academic program. Might you be in a position then where, because you want to take a certain trip or you're outside the US for a period of time, you ultimately need to file and request an extension with USCIS? This is something that could possibly happen. You think also about what might my entry look like, to what date might it be truncated. So we always advise, I think many immigration attorneys are increasingly advising that if international travel is not strictly necessary, don't go on a spur of the moment international trip, but it really underscores the necessity to make sure that you're planning with an attorney, make sure that you're looking at your I-20. If you have any doubts about whether time outside the country will affect the length of your program or your ability to continue, make sure that you vet this with your DSO and an attorney before you make your travel plans. You'll also, of course, as always, need to make sure that you have your passport in line and you've got plenty of validity on it, and that you have a valid travel document to come back. International travel is already a little bit of a more complicated space than it was before January 2025. So I always strongly advise to ask questions before making plans in the travel scheme because of what could end up being serious implications for reentry.
And is there a specific amount of time left on your status that you tell people you're not going to be let back in? Or
yeah, no, it's a good question. I would say for someone who's just been outside the country and only coming back in to graduate and they don't have much time left, I always ask this question. If you were a CBP officer and you saw these documents, do you think that someone would be coming in consistent with the plan to graduate, or what might you think? And so having a dialogue that encourages folks to think about it from CBP's perspective, I think can be helpful, because, you know, there are so many different ways that this can affect the ability to remain long-term. And sometimes that means putting off a trip that you want to take now, but is maybe better to take later.
Right, absolutely. Any other questions on there that you want to answer, or should we pivot to some of the others?
Yeah, let's see. There was a question about STEM OPT ending and lottery attempts remaining. So I think I'm going to circle back to some of the points that Danielle and I have made previously here. So under the new fixed period admission rule, just again, underscoring how much more important timing is, transitioning from STEM OPT to a new F1 program at a higher level. You know, maybe we're going to see filing an extension to stay with USCIS. Just getting a new I-20 may no longer be the solution that you would have otherwise been used to. Another thing that I would underscore here is the concern with USCIS processing times. If a 539 is required, filing well in advance of the expiration date is really important. There are delays in adjudication that can happen, that can be disruptive and very stressful. So again, considering premium processing while also understanding that even when it is properly filed and receipted, does not always result in timely adjudication. I mean, just practically speaking, early coordination with school, with immigration counsel, with employers, more important now than ever. So I would say that for this question about, you know, this is my last lottery, what am I going to do next? Early planning, constant communication with stakeholders, and timely filings are really kind of the answer there.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. There's still a little bit of confusion for folks, as I'm seeing as a theme, about what to do about fall 2026 programs and potentially programs that they are planning on joining next year, potentially applied already for spring semesters, etc. So what are you telling folks, just to repeat this very important point for a lot of people who are anxiously trying to figure out imminent steps? What are you telling them again?
Sure. So let's look at scenario one. My second master's degree, because I already have one in this scenario, will begin in the fall of 2026. Fall of 2026 meaning before September 15th. So I've already got one master's. My second one is lined up to start before September 15th. Generally, if you find yourself in this posture, you should be able to begin your new master's program, because this is before the effective date of September 15th. We are still under the DS framework until we turn that calendar page to September 15th. The first master's was completed before September 15th. So this new same degree restriction is not going to be something that we have to think about. Think about it as sort of like a grandfathering in. So starting the second master's before the rule takes effect generally should allow this transition to occur under what is now the existing DS framework. Now, that's scenario one. Let's talk scenario two. I have my first master's degree, just like I did in scenario one, but I want to start my second master's degree in the spring of 2027, after September 15th, 2026. So beginning a new academic program after September 15th is going to trigger this new extension of stay requirement under this final rule. And so the DHS guidance that we have right now says that you would need to have an extension to be able to do that, and you would not likely be able to complete this program because you already have completed a master's. I'm going to be completely honest when I say I do not know the specific mechanism through which this will occur. So as many of you on the call know, CVIS is the system through which the authorization is granted. So this is how DHS monitors. So I don't know how it looks on the back end of their system if someone is trying to enroll, but my guess is that, you know, being requested to produce the I-20 will create a situation where you look back, this person has a master's degree, therefore it can't be produced. Again, I'm not making guarantees, this is a guess, but there is going to necessarily, I believe, be a mechanism within CVIS that is going to sort of monitor for those who are attempting to circumvent what is the degree progression rule going forward.
That makes sense. There's definitely a lot of unknowns about how this will work in the CVIS system from a monitoring perspective. But it's can only be assumed that the CVIS system is being updated to, probably with AI, look at if they're smart, they're like from the technology perspective, and they're working with Palantir on this. They're definitely looking at, you know, some sort of analysis on the back end. We can imagine that that's what's happening, to be able to flag previous degrees. And
it's an interesting question though, Danielle, because think about, like, we've got another great question in here, and it's something I alluded to earlier. So like, let's say I have a JD and I want to get an LLM. If I want to enroll, what is CVIS going to say about whether it's at the same level? And like, is it just going to be a red flag? Do I have the opportunity to argue it? These are really good questions, and I regret that I don't have an answer. I am as excited to learn what those answers are. But I unfortunately think that there's going to be a lot that we don't have the opportunity to learn until either closer to September 15th or after September 15th, which I appreciate is extremely frustrating if you're in the position now to be making plans.
Yep, totally. We have a question, Anne, that just came in from a U.S. He represents a U.S. university with a Canadian campus. Some students may begin their programs at the Canadian campus later, transfer to or complete part of their studies at one of the New Jersey campuses. And under this new fixed period admission rule, would the time frame and credits complete in Canada affect the student's F1 admission period or the I-20 date? Or would the 4-year maximum begin only when the student enters the US? So that time during their degree, and there's a lot of US degree programs that have a year abroad or, you know, a semester somewhere else. How does it work with the re-entry and exit? And does that count against your 4-year?
Really good question. I believe, so something that we all do know is that no one is going to be able to get more time than is available on the I-20. So I believe that if someone, for example, got their first year under their belt at the Canadian campus and then wanted to use an F1 visa to go sophomore, junior, senior year, instead of being given 4 full years, which is the full amount, since only 3 years would be necessary to complete the degree, it would be my expectation that the end fixed date would fall toward what would be projected at the end of that 3-year period for sophomore, junior, senior year. I don't know that with 100% confidence, but I think that that's a reasonable guess.
That logically does make sense. So that's for folks who are doing this year outside the United States at the beginning of their
Yeah.
program and then entering in through a transfer of credits, which it does seem like is the case here for this representative.
Oh, great question. I really appreciate hearing that. And it's wonderful knowing that we've got folks here from the university space too. It is going to be a transformative time of learning for all of us, but especially for those of you in the international student space.
When someone is, there's a couple of questions on timing of filing extensions. So this individual specifically graduating December 2026, and then I suppose is already anticipating the need for an extension, um, which we should talk about why someone would already be anticipating that. But when should they file for that extension?
Sure. So I would say as soon as the need is identified, um, it's a good idea to start talking with
Yep.
the folks that would be producing the upcoming I-20 so that you can make sure that your program, your next program is aligned properly and that you have the requisite documentation from your school to make the USCIS filing. I would say that I am encouraging folks to think about premium processing wherever possible because the sooner you have a result, the sooner you'll sleep better at night. So um, you know, December is still a couple of months away, but if you're looking at a different program thereafter, I would say start getting those ducks in a row now to make your filing as soon as you're able.
Yeah, that makes sense. Any other questions on here, Anne, in the Q&A that are standing out to you that might be helpful for the group?
There's some really great questions. Thank you all again so much for sharing these. And again, I wish that we had the opportunity to answer them all. There's some good questions about O1, whether eligibility requirements are different than for the NIW, or whether folks are allowed to study on the O. If you think that you are eligible for an O, it's always good to speak with an attorney. It is not intended for someone to be studying full-time. It is for pursuing the area of endeavor. The eligibility requirements for an O1 are different than an EB2, but a lot of the time we see folks that are interested in an O1 pursuing the NIW path. So again, this is a great place to explore Danielle's program that she mentioned for the O1 and to talk with an attorney to see what O1 viability might look like. So great to keep open minds about what options are available post-grad.
Anything else here that is worth answering, or we might have to wrap up here and send this recording to everyone. But I think we really did answer a lot here. There's a lot of information that is obviously in the 500 to 1,000 pages that you just printed out. I love it. I love that you held that up for us, just so people really understand what attorneys are sifting through and trying to analyze. The reason we run these webinars is to try to bring experts like Anne to you and ensure that you're getting quality information from the folks that are reading those pages. And we hope that this is helpful. Feel free to be in touch with us. You can email us at info@buildtalentlabs.com, and we will be in touch, of course, with the recording, and hope you'll connect with both of us on LinkedIn, where we both are posting a lot of good information as well.
Thank you so much for having me, Danielle.
Thanks, Anne. All right, take care, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.